The blood-orange sun cast long shadows across Sweetwater Creek as Tessa Van Buren stepped down from the stagecoach, her emerald eyes squinting against the harsh light of the Montana Territory in 1878. The journey from Boston had left her weary, but as she gazed at the expanse of untamed land before her, a mix of fear and exhilaration stirred within her chest. "Miss Van Buren." A deep voice called from behind her. Tessa turned, pushing a loose strand of auburn hair back beneath her bonnet. "Yes, that's me." The man before her stood tall, with shoulders broad enough to cast a shadow that engulfed her petite frame. His face, weathered by sun and wind, was partially obscured by a beard the color of wheat. Eyes the shade of a summer sky regarded her with curiosity. "Finn Jameson," he said, extending a calloused hand. "I'm here on behalf of your uncle. He sends his apologies for not meeting you himself." Tessa accepted his hand, surprised by the gentleness of his grip despite his rough appearance. "Is he well?" A shadow crossed Finn's face. "I'm afraid I have difficult news, Miss Van Buren. Your uncle passed 3 days ago. Pneumonia took him quickly." The world seemed to tilt beneath Tessa's feet. Uncle Henry, her only living relative, the reason she'd traveled over 2,000 miles gone. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to in this strange, wild place. I don't understand," she stammered, feeling tears burn behind her eyes. "His letter arrived just 2 months ago. He wrote that his health was improving." Finn's expression softened with compassion. "Your uncle wasn't one to worry others. He held on as long as he could, hoping to see you before." He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "He left his homestead to you. Everything he had is yours now." Tessa stared at him in disbelief. She'd come to Montana to help care for her ailing uncle, perhaps to teach at the local school, not to inherit property. She knew nothing about managing land in this harsh territory. "I can't possibly. He asked me to look after you," Finn interrupted, his voice low and steady. "I work the neighboring ranch, but I've been helping with your uncle's place these past months. I can continue if you'll allow it." Tessa studied him more carefully, the way he stood with one hip cocked slightly, the revolver hanging at his side, the dust that clung to his denim trousers and cotton shirt. Everything about him spoke of a life completely foreign to her own. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" she asked cautiously. A hint of a smile appeared beneath his beard. "Your uncle was good to me when I first arrived here with nothing but the clothes on my back. Besides," he added, reaching for her trunk, "folks look out for one another out here. You'll learn that soon enough." As Finn loaded her belongings into a weathered wagon, Tessa gazed at the distant mountains, their peaks still capped with spring snow despite the June heat in the valley. She had come west seeking a new beginning after the devastation of her broken engagement. Perhaps this unexpected inheritance was God's way of giving her one. The ride to what was now her property took nearly an hour. With each passing mile, the settlements grew sparser until they were traveling through open rangeland dotted with sage and scrub pine. "There it is," Finn said at last, pointing to a modest cabin nestled against a backdrop of cottonwood trees. A small creek wound its way past the property, and beyond stretched fenced pastureland where a dozen cattle grazed. "It's not what you're used to," he said, noting her wide-eyed expression, "but it's good land. Your uncle was proud of it." As they drew closer, Tessa saw the cabin was sturdier than it first appeared, built of solid logs with a stone chimney and a small covered porch. Nearby stood a barn, a chicken coop, and what appeared to be a workshop. "Uncle Henry built all this?" she asked, impressed despite her apprehension. Finn nodded. "With his own hands. Took him 15 years. He helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk onto the porch. "I'll fetch water from the well and light the stove for you. The nights still get cold." Inside, the cabin was simple but clean. A main room contained a wood stove, a table with 4 chairs, and a comfortable-looking armchair near the hearth. A curtain partially concealed a bed in one corner. Shelves lined one wall, filled with books that made Tessa's heart lift. Uncle Henry had remembered her love of reading. Finn moved with the efficiency of someone familiar with the space, starting the fire and bringing in water. "There's food in the pantry," he explained. "And I'll bring fresh milk and eggs in the morning. "You've been very kind, Mr. Jameson," Tessa said, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. "But I don't know the first thing about running a homestead." Finn paused by the door, hat in hand. "No one does at the start." "But you'll learn. Your uncle believed you had the strength for it." His eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. "Do you?" The question hung in the air between them. Tessa thought of the life she'd left behind, the stifling propriety of Boston society, the whispers that followed her after Thomas had jilted her for her best friend. She'd come west to escape those whispers, to find purpose. "I suppose I'll have to," she replied, lifting her chin. Something like approval flashed in Finn's eyes. "I'll be back at first light. Lock the door behind me. There's a shotgun above the mantel. Do you know how to use it?" Tessa shook her head. "I'll teach you tomorrow." He settled his hat back on his head. "Rest well, Miss Van Buren." That night, alone in her uncle's cabin, her cabin now, Tessa lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness. Coyotes called in the distance, and the wind whispered secrets through the cottonwoods. She thought of Finn Jameson, so different from the gentleman she'd known in Boston, with his direct gaze and unrefined manner. Yet there was something reassuring about his presence, a steadiness that made her feel less alone in this strange new world. True to his word, Finn arrived at dawn. For the next week, he patiently taught her everything he could: how to milk the cow, collect eggs without angering the hens, chop wood efficiently, and yes, how to handle the shotgun. "You've got a good eye," he commented after she hit a tin can on her third attempt. "Keep practicing." Tessa discovered an unexpected satisfaction in the physical work. Each day brought new challenges, but also new accomplishments. The blisters on her hands began to harden into calluses, and her skin bronzed under the Montana sun. "Why did you come west, Mr. Jameson?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch after a long day's work. The question had been on her mind since they'd met. Finn was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I fought for the Union. After the war, there wasn't much left for me back in Pennsylvania, too many ghosts." He stared out at the mountains, now painted purple by the setting sun. "Out here, a man can remake himself." Tessa nodded, understanding more than he might realize. "I came for similar reasons." Different circumstances, but the same hope. Their eyes met briefly in the fading light, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared purpose that transcended their different backgrounds. As weeks turned into months, Tessa found herself looking forward to Finn's daily visits. She learned that, beneath his gruff exterior, lay a thoughtful mind. He'd brought books from his own collection when he discovered her love of reading, and in the evenings, they often discussed stories and ideas as the firelight danced across the cabin walls. By late summer, Tessa had settled into a rhythm of life at the homestead. She'd even made friends with some of the women from nearby farms who had initially been skeptical of the city girl, but had warmed to her determination to learn their ways. One hot August afternoon, as Tessa was hanging laundry to dry, she spotted a cloud of dust in the distance. Soon, the sound of hoofbeats confirmed riders were approaching, 3 men she didn't recognize. Instinctively, she moved toward the cabin where the shotgun waited. Finn had warned her about drifters and outlaws who sometimes passed through the territory. "Most folks are decent," he'd said, "but keep that shotgun handy all the same." The riders slowed as they neared the property line. The man in front, wearing a black hat and sporting an elaborate mustache, raised his hand in greeting. "Afternoon, madam," he called. "Might we trouble you for some water? Been riding since dawn." Tessa hesitated, shotgun now in hand but held low against her skirt. "The well's over there," she replied, pointing. "You're welcome to water yourselves and your horses, then move along." The man dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. His companions remained mounted, their eyes scanning the property in a way that made Tessa uneasy. "Mighty kind of you," the man said, approaching the well. As he drew closer, Tessa could see his clothes were finer than most cowboys, wore a silk vest beneath his dust-covered jacket. "Don't often see a lady like yourself out here alone." "I'm not alone," Tessa lied smoothly. "My husband will be back any minute with our hands." The man smiled, revealing a gold tooth. Is that so? Funny, I heard old Henry Van Buren passed on, leaving his place to a niece from back east, single lady from what folks say. Tessa's grip tightened on the shotgun. You heard wrong, did I? His hand moved toward the pistol at his hip. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both turn. Finn rode into the yard at a gallop, rifle in hand. He reined in hard, his horse spraying dirt as it slid to a stop. Everything all right, Tessa, he called, his eyes never leaving the stranger's. The man in the black hat raised his hands slightly. Just getting some water, friend, no harm intended. Finn dismounted, his movements deliberate. Then you've had your water, time to move on. A tense moment passed before the man shrugged. Sure thing. Lovely place you got here, he added, tipping his hat to Tessa. Might be worth a fair price to the right buyer. It's not for sale, Tessa said firmly. Everything has its price, madam. With that, he returned to his horse and the three riders departed, dust rising behind them. When they were out of sight, Tessa let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Who were they? Finn's expression was grim. That was Victor Blackstone. He owns the big spread east of here, been buying up all the small homesteads he can. Why? Railroads coming through. Land values are about to soar. Finn secured his rifle and turned to her. Are you all right? Did they threaten you? Tessa shook her head. Not directly, but I don't think they were just passing by. Finn's jaw tightened. Probably not. Blackstone's been pressuring folks to sell. Some who refused have had mysterious accidents. Fear flickered through Tessa, but she pushed it aside. This is my home now. I won't be intimidated into leaving. Finn studied her for a long moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. Henry would be proud to hear you say that. That evening, Finn stayed later than usual, checking the property boundaries and making sure all was secure. As darkness fell, they sat by the fire, the events of the day casting a shadow over their usual comfortable conversation. Finn, Tessa said finally, using his first name without thinking, what if they come back when you're not here? He looked up from the coffee mug in his hands, his eyes serious. I've been thinking about that. I could stay here for a while, sleep in the barn. The suggestion brought heat to Tessa's cheeks. Even with him in the barn, having an unmarried man stay on her property would cause gossip. Yet the alternative, being alone and vulnerable, was worse. People will talk, she murmured. People always talk, he replied with a shrug. Question is, do you care more about that or your safety? Tessa thought of the society she'd left behind, where appearances mattered above all else. That world had given her nothing but pain in the end. Stay, she decided, but we should let people know why. I won't hide like we're doing something shameful when we're not. Finn nodded, a look of respect in his eyes. We'll ride into town tomorrow, speak to Sheriff Miller, make it official that I'm working as your foreman. The following morning, they made the journey to Sweetwater Creek. The small town had grown since Tessa's arrival, with new buildings going up in anticipation of the railroad. At the sheriff's office, they explained the situation with Blackstone. Sheriff Miller, a graying man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, listened carefully. Can't arrest a man for making an offer even if his methods are questionable, he said. But I'll keep an eye out, and having Jameson stay on as your foreman is smart, Miss Van Buren. I'll make sure folks understand the arrangement. As autumn approached, life settled into a new pattern. Finn moved his few possessions into the barn, where he constructed comfortable living quarters. He continued to teach Tessa about ranching, and together they prepared the homestead for winter. During those golden days of fall, something shifted between them. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal. Tessa found herself sharing stories of her life in Boston, even the painful tale of her broken engagement. He did you a favor, Finn said one evening as they walked the property line at sunset. A man who'd betray you once would do it again. Perhaps, Tessa admitted. But at the time it felt like the end of everything. Everyone pitied me, the jilted fiancé. That's partly why I came west when Uncle Henry wrote. Finn was silent for a moment, then, I'm glad you did. The simple words warmed her more than any elaborate declaration could have. So am I. As they turned back toward the cabin, Finn's hand brushed against hers, perhaps by accident, perhaps not. Either way, Tessa didn't pull away, and for a brief moment, their fingers intertwined before separating again. That night, alone in her bed, Tessa admitted to herself what she'd been trying to deny for weeks. She was falling in love with Finn Jameson. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. She had no idea if he felt the same, and the risk of another heartbreak made her cautious. October brought the first snow, dusting the mountains and transforming the landscape into a gleaming wonderland. It also brought news that the railroad survey was complete. The line would indeed pass near Sweetwater Creek, cutting through land that currently belonged to several small ranchers, including a corner of Tessa's property. "They're offering fair compensation," Finn explained after returning from town with the news. "But it gives Blackstone more reason to want this land. With railroad access, it becomes even more valuable." His concerns proved prophetic. The very next day, Victor Blackstone himself rode up to the cabin, alone this time but no less intimidating. "Miss Van Buren," he greeted her, removing his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Thought I'd pay a proper visit now we've been introduced." Tessa stood on the porch, acutely aware of Finn working in the barn nearby. "Mr. Blackstone, what brings you here?" "Business, purely business." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'd like to make you an offer for this property. $5,000, that's twice what it's worth today." The sum was substantial enough to set her up comfortably anywhere she chose. For a moment, Tessa was tempted. Life here was hard, full of challenges she'd never anticipated. But then she thought of all she'd learned, the strength she'd discovered within herself, the beauty of this wild place that had somehow become home. And she thought of Finn, though she tried not to let that influence her decision. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Blackstone, but this land isn't for sale." His smile faded. "Miss Van Buren, I don't think you understand. That railroad's coming whether you like it or not. Small ranchers like you won't survive the changes it brings. Big operations are the future." "Perhaps," she replied evenly, "but I intend to find out for myself." Blackstone's expression hardened. "Things happen out here, Miss Van Buren. Accidents, fires. Would be a shame to lose everything because you were too stubborn to see reason." Before Tessa could respond, Finn emerged from the barn, axe in hand. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Blackstone's eyes narrowed. "Just having a business discussion with the lady." "Sounds more like threats to me," Finn said, moving to stand beside Tessa. "Take it how you will, Jameson." Blackstone replaced his hat. "My offer stands for 1 week, Miss Van Buren. After that." He shrugged eloquently, then mounted his horse and rode away. "He's not going to give up easily," Tessa said, watching him go. Finn's hand came to rest lightly on her shoulder. "Neither will we." That night they kept watch in shifts, but nothing happened. The next day passed uneventfully, and the day after that. By the third day, Tessa began to hope that Blackstone's threats had been just that, empty words meant to frighten her. Then came the fire. It started in the middle of the night. Tessa woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of Finn shouting her name. She stumbled from bed to find the barn ablaze, flames leaping toward the night sky. "The horses!" she cried, rushing outside in her nightgown. Finn was already leading the terrified animals out, coughing from the smoke. Together, they worked to free the livestock and move them to safety while the barn burned. Neighbors from miles around arrived to help battle the flames, forming a bucket line from the creek. But it was too late to save the structure. By dawn, nothing remained but smoldering ruins. Finn's few possessions were lost, though thankfully no animals had perished. It was deliberate, Sheriff Miller confirmed, kneeling to examine something in the ashes. "Coal oil. Someone doused the hay and set it alight." "Blackstone," Finn said, his voice rough with smoke and fury. The sheriff sighed. "Likely so, but can we prove it? His men all have alibis. They were drinking at the saloon until midnight, witnessed by a dozen people." "So he gets away with it?" Tessa asked, anger burning in her chest. "For now," Miller replied, "but I'll keep investigating. Meanwhile, you two watch your backs." After the sheriff left, Tessa surveyed the destruction. The barn had been more than just a building. It represented months of work, security for the animals, storage for the hay that would see them through winter. "We can rebuild," Finn said, seeming to read her thoughts, "but Blackstone won't stop here." "What do we do?" Tessa asked, exhaustion settling over her like a heavy blanket. Finn's eyes met hers, determination evident in every line of his face. We fight back. Not with fire or violence that makes us no better than him. We fight by holding on, by showing him and everyone else that this land is worth defending. In the days that followed, neighbors rallied around them. Men arrived with tools and lumber, women brought food, and together they began rebuilding the barn. It was a testament to the community Tessa had become part of, the connections she'd made in her months in Montana. With the barn gone, Finn moved into the cabin's main room, sleeping on a pallet by the fire. The arrangement raised eyebrows, but after the fire, even the most gossipy neighbors understood the necessity. Living in such close quarters brought a new intimacy to their relationship. They moved around each other with a growing awareness, their conversations often trailing into comfortable silence filled with unspoken possibilities. One evening, as winter tightened its grip on the land, Tessa sat by the fire mending a tear in one of Finn's shirts. He watched her from the table where he was cleaning his revolver, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "My mother used to do that," he said softly. "Sit by the fire in the evenings, mending. I'd forgotten until just now." Tessa looked up, needle paused mid-stitch. "You rarely speak of your family." Finn reassembled his gun with practiced movements. "Not much to tell. Father was a blacksmith, died when I was 12. Mother raised me and my sister alone until the fever took her when I was 16. Sarah, my sister, married a year later. Her husband took her west to Oregon Territory." He shrugged. "Haven't heard from her in years." "I'm sorry," Tessa said, understanding the weight of such losses. "My parents died in a carriage accident when I was 18. Uncle Henry was my only family." Finn nodded, holstering his weapon. "So we're both alone in the world." "Not anymore," Tessa said before she could stop herself. Their eyes met across the room, and the air between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken feelings. Finn stood slowly and crossed to where she sat, taking the mending from her hands and setting it aside. He knelt before her, his eyes serious. "Tessa," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I've not got much to offer a woman like you. I'm not educated or refined. All I have is my word and my hands and whatever future I can build." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "But everything I have is yours if you want it." Tessa's heart pounded in her chest. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Finn Jameson?" A smile tugged at his lips. "I reckon I am, though I'm making a poor job of it." He took her hands in his. "I love you, Tessa Van Buren. Will you marry me?" Joy bubbled up within her, bright and unexpected. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." He kissed her then, tender at first, then with growing passion. When they finally drew apart, both breathless, Tessa rested her forehead against his. "Blackstone won't like this," she murmured. "It will only strengthen our claim to the land." "Let him come," Finn replied, his arms tightening around her. "We'll face him together." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Sweetwater Creek. The entire community turned out for the occasion, filling the wooden pews and spilling out onto the snow-covered street. Tessa wore a dress of deep blue, while not the white gown she'd once envisioned, but perfect for a winter wedding on the frontier. As they exchanged vows, Tessa looked into Finn's eyes and saw her future reflected their years of hard work and joy, challenges and triumphs shared. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was a promise sealed before friends who had become family. The celebration afterward was held at the town hall with music and dancing that lasted well into the night. Even Sheriff Miller joined in, partnering Tessa for a lively reel. "Congratulations," he said as they circled each other. "Though I should warn you word as Blackstone's not happy about this union." Tessa's joy dimmed slightly. "Do you think he'll try something else?" "Hard to say. He's a man used to getting his way." The sheriff's expression grew serious. "But he's also smart enough to know when he's beaten." "You two have the community behind you now. That counts for something out here." As if summoned by their conversation, the door to the hall swung open and Victor Blackstone himself strode in. The music faltered, then stopped entirely. Conversations died as every head turned toward the unexpected guest. Finn moved immediately to Tessa's side, his hand finding hers. Blackstone surveyed the room, his expression unreadable. Then he removed his hat and approached the newlyweds, Mr. and Mrs. Jameson, he said, inclining his head slightly, I've come to offer my congratulations. The words were polite, but his tone held a note of calculation that put Tessa on edge. Thank you, she replied cautiously, though I admit I'm surprised to see you here. Blackstone smiled thinly. I can respect determination even when it opposes my interests. He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. A wedding gift. Finn didn't move to take it. We don't want anything from you, Blackstone. It's not what you think, the rancher said. It's the deed to the northeast section of my property, the parcel that borders yours. Consider it compensation for your unfortunate fire and a gesture of goodwill. Finn and Tessa exchanged a glance of disbelief. Why? Finn asked bluntly. Blackstone's expression hardened momentarily before smoothing again. Let's just say I've reconsidered my approach to certain matters. The railroads offered me a different deal, one that doesn't require your land. Besides, he added with a calculating look, it's never wise to make enemies of one's neighbors, especially when those neighbors have as many friends as you appear to. He placed the envelope on a nearby table. The deed's legal. Sheriff Miller can confirm it. With that, he replaced his hat and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. I wouldn't expect any more trouble from me or mine. Good evening to you all. After he'd gone, the room erupted in whispers. Sheriff Miller examined the deed and confirmed it appeared legitimate. I don't trust him, Finn muttered to Tessa. This feels like some kind of trick. Perhaps, she agreed. Or perhaps he simply recognized he couldn't win this particular battle. Either way, we'll remain vigilant. The celebration resumed, though with a more subdued energy. As the evening wore on, Tessa found herself watching Finn as he talked and laughed with their neighbors. He caught her eye across the room and smiled a private smile meant only for her that sent warmth cascading through her body. Later that night, in the privacy of their cabin, their home, Finn pulled Tessa into his arms. Happy, Mrs. Jameson, he murmured against her hair. Happier than I ever thought possible, she replied, lifting her face for his kiss. They faced the remainder of winter together, working side by side to care for the livestock and maintain the homestead. The rebuilt barn stood strong against the snow and wind, and inside the cabin, their love created a warmth that no cold could penetrate. Spring arrived with a rush of new life. The pastures greened, calves were born, and Tessa planted a vegetable garden that promised summer bounty. They heard nothing more from Blackstone, though they remained wary. One warm May morning, Finn woke before dawn and slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb Tessa. She stirred anyway, reaching for him in the half-light. Where are you going? She murmured sleepily. He bent to kiss her forehead. Got something to do, I'll be back for breakfast. Tessa drifted back to sleep, waking again when sunlight streamed through the cabin windows. She dressed and started the coffee, wondering what had called Finn away so early. She found him by the front fence line, working intently on one of the posts with a knife. As she approached, he straightened, a look of boyish uncertainty crossing his face. What are you doing? She asked, curious. He stepped aside to reveal his handiwork. There, carved deep into the wood of the fence post, was her name, Tessa. Below it, he'd added their wedding date and a simple heart. I wanted to mark it, he explained, suddenly seeming unsure of himself. This place our home. The start of our life together. Tessa's heart swelled with love as she traced the letters with her fingertips. No one had ever done something so sweetly romantic for her. It's beautiful, Finn. Relief and pleasure washed over his face. You like it? In answer, she rose on tiptoes to kiss him, pouring all her love into the gesture. When they parted, she said, Wait here, I have something to add. She hurried to the small flower bed she'd started near the cabin, where early spring blooms were just beginning to show color. Carefully, she dug up several rose bushes she'd been nurturing, cuttings from wild roses that grew along the creek, transplanted to create something beautiful near their home. Returning to the fence post, she began digging in the soft earth beneath Finn's carving. He watched, puzzled at first, then understanding dawned as she gently placed the rose bushes in the soil. They'll grow tall here, she explained, packing dirt around the roots. And every summer when they bloom, they'll mark this spot, Our spot. Finn knelt beside her, helping to settle the plants. "Roses for my Tessa," he said softly. "Seems fitting." They worked together, their hands meeting in the earth, building something that would grow and flourish in the years to come, much like their love. As summer advanced, the roses took root and began to climb the fence post, reaching toward Tessa's carved name. True to Blackstone's word, they had no further trouble from him or his men. The railroad construction began, bringing new people and opportunities to the area. Finn and Tessa used the compensation money to expand their herd, and with the additional land from Blackstone's deed, their ranch began to prosper. In July, Tessa confirmed what she'd suspected for weeks: she was with child. Finn's joy at the news was boundless. He lifted her in his arms and spun her around, heedless of who might see. "Careful," she laughed. "I'm in a delicate condition, remember?" He set her down gently, his hands lingering on her waist. "A baby," he said in wonder. "Our baby." The months that followed were filled with preparations. Finn built a cradle from pine wood, carving intricate patterns along its edges. Tessa sewed tiny garments and quilted a blanket from scraps of her wedding dress. The women of Sweetwater Creek organized a baby shower, bringing gifts and advice for the mother-to-be. Winter returned, harsher than the previous year. Snow piled high around the cabin and bitter winds howled across the plains. Yet inside, Tessa and Finn created a haven of warmth and love, reading to each other in the evenings and making plans for their growing family. In February, as a blizzard raged outside, Tessa went into labor. The nearest doctor was in Sweetwater Creek, unreachable through the storm-blocked passes. Finn sent their ranch hand, young Billy Peterson, to fetch Martha Jenkins, a neighboring farmer's wife known for her midwifery skills. Hours later, Martha arrived, half frozen but determined. She took charge of the situation with calm efficiency, sending Finn to boil water and prepare clean linens while she examined Tessa. "Everything looks normal," she assured them both. "But first babies often take their time arriving." The labor lasted through the night and into the following day. Finn remained by Tessa's side, holding her hand through each contraction, wiping her brow and murmuring encouragement when her strength flagged. "I can't do this," Tessa gasped as the pain intensified. Finn's eyes, red-rimmed from worry and lack of sleep, held her steadily. "You can. You're the strongest person I know, Tessa Jameson. Our baby needs you to be strong just a little longer." Drawing on reserves she didn't know she possessed, Tessa pushed when Martha instructed, breathed when told to rest, and finally, as the blizzard outside began to wane, brought their daughter into the world with a final, exhausted effort. The infant's lusty cry filled the cabin, a sound so beautiful it brought tears to both parents' eyes. Martha cleaned and swaddled the baby before placing her in Tessa's arms. "She's perfect," Tessa whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. The baby had a dusting of dark hair, and when she briefly opened her eyes, they were the same clear blue as her father's. Finn sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Tessa, the other hand gently touching his daughter's cheek. "What shall we name her?" he asked, voice thick with emotion. Tessa looked up at him, love overwhelming her despite her exhaustion. "Hope," she said softly, "because that's what she represents, our hope for the future." "Hope Jameson," Finn tested the name, then nodded. "It suits her." The following spring brought new growth to their ranch, not just in the form of calves and crops, but in their family life as well. Hope thrived, a happy baby with her father's smile and her mother's determination. Tessa recovered her strength and embraced motherhood with the same courage she'd shown in adapting to frontier life. The roses beneath the fencepost bloomed gloriously that summer, climbing higher to frame Tessa's carved name. Finn added Hope's name and birthdate to the post, creating a living family record. "One day," he told Tessa as they stood admiring the flowering vines, Hope cradled in her arms, "this post will be covered with names, children and grandchildren, a legacy that started with us." "I'd like that," Tessa replied, leaning against his solid strength. "Though perhaps we should space the children out a bit. Hope keeps us busy enough for now." Finn laughed and pulled her closer. "No rush, we have all the time in the world." As summer faded into another autumn, word reached them that Victor Blackstone had sold his ranch and moved east, his railroad investments having made him wealthy enough to retire in comfort. The news brought a sense of closure, the final chapter in a conflict that had nearly cost them everything. "Do you ever regret it?" Finn asked Tessa one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Hope slept peacefully in her cradle nearby. "Regret what, coming west? Staying through all the hardships, you could have had an easier life." Tessa considered the question, thinking of all they'd endured, the loneliness of her first days, the threats from Blackstone, the bitter winters, the backbreaking work. Then she thought of all they'd gained, their thriving ranch, the respect of their community, their beautiful daughter, and most importantly, their love. "Not for a single moment," she answered truthfully. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be." Finn smiled and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "Me too." As darkness fell, they remained on the porch, talking softly of their plans for the ranch, for Hope's future, for the life they were building together. Behind them, the cabin glowed with lamplight, a beacon of home and hearth in the vast Montana wilderness. And at the fence line, barely visible in the gathering dusk, roses climbed toward the stars, twining around the carved testament of their love. 5 years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Hope grew from a toddling child into a spirited young girl with her father's love of the outdoors and her mother's quick mind. The ranch prospered, allowing them to hire more hands and expand their operations. And their family grew with the addition of twins Frederick and Francis, born in the spring of 1884. The roses by the Fencepost flourished, climbing ever higher around the carved names that now included all 3 children. Each summer when they bloomed, Tessa would cut a few to place in a vase on their dinner table, a reminder of that first sweet gesture and all that had grown from it. On a golden autumn day in 1885, as they celebrated 7 years of marriage, Finn and Tessa stood together by the fence post, watching their children play in the yard. Hope, now 6, was showing her younger siblings how to make chains from wildflowers, her dark hair so like her father's, shining in the sunlight. "Did you ever imagine this?" Tessa asked, leaning against Finn's shoulder. "That day when you met me at the stagecoach, did you ever think we'd be here?" Finn's arm tightened around her waist. "I hoped," he admitted. "From the moment I saw you, standing there looking so determined despite being completely out of your element, I hoped." Tessa smiled, remembering that day, how lost she'd felt, how uncertain of the future. "We've built something beautiful here, haven't we?" Finn looked around at their home, the sturdy cabin now expanded to accommodate their growing family, the well-tended fields, the healthy livestock, and most importantly, the 3 children who represented their legacy and their love. "Yes," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Yes, we have." And as the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the land they'd fought for and loved, the roses glowed red against the weathered wood of the fence post, a living symbol of a love that had taken root in the wild soil of Montana and blossomed into something enduring and true.